Welcome back everybody to our Unit 10 Lecture 2, where we're going to look at the different artists and sculptors that made up the Renaissance and made it memorable. As we learned in Lecture 1, Florence was where it all began for the Renaissance. Today we're going to see what all this excitement was about, who was all involved, and how they contributed to the Renaissance, as well as to the ending of the Middle Ages, bringing us into a more modern time period. We're going to look at some of these artists, including Donatello, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Botticelli, a couple of these pieces of work that these guys are famous for. A couple things you need to be made aware of, though. Some of the artwork we're going to see is original, meaning that it's going to show probably more than you're used to seeing in artwork on public display. It is original, it is not to freak anybody out, but it does certainly remind us of a different time period where people's idea of sexuality and the human body is different than what we see it is today. So don't be surprised if you see something you're not used to seeing in public. With that, before we get started, we do have a short public service announcement, so let's get with that.
Hey, guys, let's quiet down. No cell phones, no talking, no texting. You don't think it makes a sound? It does. I hear it. Click, 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 click. Okay, I know what you're thinking. You're a panda, man. What are you gonna do about it? Check it out. Everybody, Paws of fury. Get ready to feel the thunder. You guys are awesome. Except for you, with the texting. I'm watching you.
Alright, now that we got all that fun stuff out of the way, let's get started. First, we need to start talking about Renaissance art, and that's what we're going to begin our Lecture 2 on. Back in the day, these artists were supported by patrons, such as Isabella d'Este and the Medici, who we've talked about before. The only people that had desire were the artwork, and that could pay for it was the church or the rich. So it was these patrons of the arts, that were able to pay for and have this artwork for them, for entertainment, for their own personal pleasure, as well as for being put on display for people to see, specifically at the church, typically. It was common for medieval artists to use religious subjects to convey spiritual ideas and ideals. Looking at religious images to portray some sort of religious lesson or story was common. So that's why we see a lot of artwork in churches, especially in Florence and all around Italy, where we see like the Sistine Chapel or the Last Supper, statues of David. A lot of religious characters that we've seen from the Bible. Religion was a good muse for them, or an inspiration that a lot of artists used. So we're going to see some of those today as we look at some of the art. One of the things that was different about Renaissance art was that it portrayed a lot of these religious subjects realistically, that they were copied from classical models of Greek and Rome. So a lot of these guys, we've seen images of these guys in the past, but these Renaissance artists make it more real, more human looking. And we'll see some examples of that on how they were able to actually look at a piece of art and the viewer could actually kind of get an idea what that statue was feeling, or what was going on in that artist's mind when he was drawing that picture. We see a more three-dimensional, humanistic reality to what these paintings were trying to express. So we'll look at some of those as well. The Renaissance painters would use a technique known as perspective, which showed 3 dimensions on a flat surface using a vanishing point, which showed depth to the art, making it look more realistic and believable. Those of you that have had art class before probably have done this type of art in the past. Very common for Renaissance writers or painters. Oftentimes, a type of material that was used for art is known as fresco. Fresco is a style of painting where the artist paints on wet plaster. It creates kind of, not an illusion, but a more glossy look, a more realistic look to the art. So they would actually paint colors on a damp or wet plaster, and it would dry and it would just bring out the colors that much more. So That was common back then. It was a type of style. So when you hear of the term fresco, it's referring to art that had been made on wet plaster originally. So, let's start our journey with our first artist. Particularly, we see here an image of Michelangelo. So, give you a little bit of background on Michelangelo before we get into his art. His full name, if I get this right, was Michelangelo de Lodovico Bonatoli Simoni. I'll try to put that on the screen for you. He was born on March 6th of 1475 and died on February 18th of 1564. After his mother's death, when he was only 6 years old, Michelangelo was raised by a stonecutter, his wife, and his family. This is probably where he learned how to sculpt from rock using a hammer and chisel. Michelangelo never married, but based upon many of his poems and writings, it became clear that he was in fact a homosexual and had some sort of relationship with one of his apprentices. It is unclear as to the extent of how close these two were, but it does seem likely that there was something between these two. During his life, he is credited with a variety of different art, including paintings, sculptures, buildings, and frescoes. So let's take a look. Michelangelo. He was considered to be a Renaissance man. Michelangelo was a sculptor, painter, architect, and poet. He was particularly famous for his portrayals of the human body. He was known to have painted both males and females, but when it came to sculpting, he was very prolific at the male figure. That means he was very good at it, very detailed. Some of his more famous works are the statue of David, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and the dome at St. Peter's Basilica, which is the church for the Holy Roman Catholic Church, which we've seen pictures of before. Now, you may have seen this image before. It's a very popular image on the Sistine Chapel. This particular scene is known as the creation of Adam. If you've never seen the different images on the Sistine Chapel, it has all these different sections and quadrants of all these different parts of the Bible, displaying all these different scenes and stories, but through art. This particular scene is known as the creation of Adam. It's depicting when God created Adam, obviously. Here we see Adam as a perfect being created by God. But if you look closer, you'll see Eve also there. She's kind of sheltered under the left arm of God, looking kind of nervous and apprehensive. Let's see if there's more to this story. If we take a closer look at this image, things get a little bit more interesting. Because in this picture, we look at God, and there's more than meets the eye. Notice how God seems to be floating in front of something. To many, this background is the object of a human brain. If you compare the different parts of the brain's cross-section, which we see here on the left, you see amazing similarities and correlations to the artwork done by Michelangelo here. This is a type of art, or what's known as iconography. It's a way of showing two different things in the same image. It's believed that Michelangelo at one time, to become so knowledgeable about about the human body, and so prolific in being able to draw it and sculpt it, it's believed that he had been one to steal the cadavers of dead bodies or recently buried bodies. He would take them back to his place, his home. He would dissect them. And from that, he would have a better understanding of the human body. It's kind of sick when you think about it, but in order to be an excellent sculptor, an excellent artist, you want to be as detailed as possible. And what better way to find detail without having to ask for somebody's permission, I guess. Kind of sick, I guess, but no doubt he was a great sculptor and great painter. Here we see the Sistine Chapel in its entirety. The church was built between 1473 and 1481. However, between 1508 and 1512 is when Michelangelo was given the task, with the patronage of Pope Julius II, or to paint the inside of it. Throughout these images, you see different stories of the Bible. Such stories include Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, the Great Flood, and the Last Judgment. In 1984, the chapel began a large restoration project that took 10 years to complete. The smoke from the candles that had been burning in there for the past many centuries was covering up the original grandness of the images. Now it looks good as new. On August 16th, 1501, at the very young age of 26, which for an artist was pretty young, Michelangelo was given a contract to create a carved statue of the biblical figure David. Standing at 17 feet tall, this marble-like depiction is believed to illustrate David just prior to his biblical battle with Goliath. This is assumed because of his posture and the tenseness his body is showing. If you take a close look at certain parts of his bodies, his arms and his chest in particular, you can see the details of the intricacy of the musculature and posture that he's presenting here. The sculpture is so detailed that if you take a close-up, or if you get close enough to it, you can actually see what would be blood veins that would be running through this sculpture's arms. Pretty detailed. Our last example for Michelangelo is looking at his work with St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. Again, this is the church for the Roman Catholic faith. Although he was not alone in its design, he did play a very important role in it. He had taken over the construction of it later on, and with it inherited many of the problems associated with its building. With his expertise in art, Michelangelo was able to modify the design to make it look more grand than originally had been planned. Today, St. Peter's represents the place where St. Peter, an apostle of Jesus, was buried. It is considered one of the most holiest sites in the Christian world and the greatest of all churches in Christendom. Moving on. Our next artist we're going to look at is Donatello, whose full name, and again I love these Italian names because you can never pronounce them, Donatello de Niccolò de Benito Bardi. I think I got it. We just call him Donatello because it's a lot easier to remember and spell. He is most known for his bas-relief, which is simply a shallow relief against a surface. He was born around 1386 and likely received an early education in goldsmithing. The majority of his statues were created for the church. One of his most famous works was that of a bronze David, depicting him victoriously standing over the dead body of Goliath. Similarly, as with Michelangelo, Donatello was also believed to be homosexual, and he actually admitted this, though there's no other proof to it other than his word. He ended up leaving Florence in 1433 when Cosimo Medici was exiled, and he moved to Rome. While there, he created something known as the Tomb of Giovanni Crovelli and the Cerebrium, which is in St. Peter's Basilica. In May of 1434, he was able to return to Florence and continue to create other works of art. Donatello was born during the center of the Italian Renaissance in Florence. He made sculptures more realistic by carving them in natural postures and expressions that revealed their personalities. He didn't just have them stand there and be very stoic and very plain-faced. No, he actually had them posing, making them look more realistic, emotional, things along that line. Like that sculpture is going to do something. Okay, it kind of makes it interactive in some ways. His bronze sculpture, known as the Equestrian Statue of Guatemala, is an example of where he used emotion, position, and symbolism to convey the message of power in his statues. And as mentioned before, Donatello also sculpted David as well, which was a favorite subject of the Renaissance sculptures. And here we see this bronze David. Cosimo de' Medici, we've talked about him before, gave him the money to make this bronze statue. It is believed to be the first known freestanding bronze nude that had been created since ancient times. It's also considered probably the first major work of a Renaissance sculptor. And we see a picture of it here. Here we see another one that we just talked about, the equestrian Gautamotella. This statue, which is a monument to a guy by the name of Erasmo de Narni, is another example of Donatello creating a monument style that had not been seen since ancient times. This monument was placed for the public to see, which separates it from a lot of others that were out during its time. It's probably because this guy, Ernesto, wanted to be remembered. If I remember the story correctly, his wife actually had it commissioned to be built in memory of her husband. Typically, a lot of these statues would be placed over the tombs of the people that they're depicting, but not so in this case. And probably one of the more famous, renowned Renaissance men, we have Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was born April 15th in 1452 and is one of a few Italian Renaissance polymaths, or someone who is smart in a large variety of subjects. Leonardo is a known painter, sculptor, architect, musician, mathematician, engineer, inventor, anatomist, geologist, cartographer, botanist, and writer. He's all those things. He's known for his unquenchable curiosity and feverish, inventive imagination. He's considered by many to be one of the greatest painters of all time. Born in Venice, which is a city in the city-state of Florence, his full name is Leonardo de Ser Piera da Vinci, or obviously we call him simply Leonardo da Vinci. He is considered a prolific painter, sculptor, inventor, and scientist, as we mentioned earlier. He had an unstoppable interest in how things worked. His many works are too numerous to get them all out, but many of them are all considered masterpieces. Some of the more well-known ones are the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, and the Virgin on the Rocks, just to name three of them. For those of you that have watched the movie or have read the book, The Da Vinci Code, many of Leonardo's works are included in this book for the conspiracy theorists that believe that these paintings and artwork have ulterior purposes. So I would highly recommend reading that book. Very interesting, talks a lot about fact with a twist of suspense and certainly some conspiracy theory in there as well. And there she is, Mona Lisa. Considered by most to be probably the best piece of art ever done in the world. No piece of artwork has been more vivid, written about, or sung about. It is believed that the woman in the painting is actually a woman by the name of Lisa Giraldini, if I could pronounce it right, Giraldini or something, who's the wife of Francisco del Ganciando. It is believed that it had been painted sometime between 1503 and 1506, though some evidence suggests that Leonardo may have been working on it as late as 1517. Currently, it is in the property of the French Republic. It is on permanent display at the Louvre Museum in Paris, France, and it's been there since 1797. Not including a short stint of when it had actually been missing or been stolen, but we won't talk about that. The painting was last assessed to be worth $100 million in 1962. If you take into account inflation, today, this one painting would be worth approximately $760 million. So it certainly is a piece of art that many people find interesting, to say the least. Another one of Da Vinci's widely known paintings is shown here, The Last Supper. This biblical image depicts Jesus and his disciples shortly after telling them that one would betray them. If you look at how each person is positioned in the painting, you can see almost all the disciples are lined up shoulder to shoulder. Another interesting thing about this painting is it includes several references to the number 3. If you look around, there are 3 windows. Each person is in a group of 3, except Jesus, and the Jesus figure resembles that of a triangle, as does the angle between Jesus and the person directly to his right or our left. Kind of makes the shape of a triangle or a 3-sided figure. It is believed that Leonardo did this deliberately in order to symbolize the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Again, if you're a Dan Brown fan and read the Da Vinci Code, there's some interesting pieces that some conspiracy theorists have about this particular painting. We could talk about those some other time. If you want to find some time, we can go over it. But it is certainly, again, a piece of historical art that a lot of people know of all around the world. Here we see the picture as it was during the 1970s. If you look closely at the painting, there's an arch just underneath Jesus, kind of right in the center there. In 1652, a doorway had actually been cut through the painting and later bricked back up. In 1978 and until 1999, the painting went through a major restoration to clean, repair, and restore the image to its original quality. And that's what it looks like today. And as you can see, that arch is still there, but unfortunately, the area underneath Jesus isn't the original part anymore. It was torn away. So, pretty interesting. If you actually go on Google right now and do a search of the Last Supper, they actually have digital images of this painting, and it's amazing on the quality of these pictures. You can actually zoom in and get very detailed information from this painting. It's amazing what you can see from those digital images that were done. So, if you get the time, check it out. Additionally, here you can see some of his other drawings and designs. On the top left is a helicopter, way before its time. On the bottom left is another flying machine. And on the right side, we see his notes on the musculature of the human arm. We are fortunate today that Leonardo kept amazing notes. Hundreds of thousands of pages that have been discovered. He would spend time preparing his artwork with drafts and ideas, along with keeping notes on almost everything he saw daily of interest to him. These notes that he kept today are known as his codex. And a lot of these codexes or copies of them can be seen online, but the originals are actually kept in storage in some museums around the world. Pretty much the Vatican, if I'm not mistaken, as well as the Louvre, is where the originals are. And moving on to our last artist for this lecture, we have Raphael. His full name is Raphael Sanzio de Urbino. He was born in the spring of 1483 and died in 1520. He only lived 37 years, but in that short time span, he was able to create such great works that it placed him as one of the 3 greatest artists of his time period, the other 2 being Da Vinci and Michelangelo. At the early age of 8 years old, he was able to gain an apprenticeship under the guidance of Pedro Perugino. Having an apprenticeship at that young age was extremely rare, and therefore it's disputed by some if it even happened at all. Raphael's art is known for its color and its use of emotion. He did not marry, but at one time was engaged. Unfortunately, his fiancée had died prior to the wedding. It is known that Raphael had many affairs with many women, but only showed an interest in one woman in particular, Margherita Lutti. His death at the young age is accounted to being because, supposedly, of a night of excessive sex with Lutti. He came down supposedly with a fever for which could not be controlled, and unfortunately died several days later. So, a little bit of interesting facts about that guy. So let's look at a few other things about Raphael. He learned his craft by studying Leonardo and Michelangelo. Why not? I mean, if you want to be the best, study from the best, right? One of his favorite subjects was that of the Madonna and the child, and Jesus the child. The Madonna is also referred to as the Virgin Mary. Some of his other famous works include The School of Athens and The Marriage of the Virgin. This piece of artwork is known as The School of Athens. It is considered to be one of the most famous frescoes done by Raphael. A fresco, if you recall, is a painting done on freshly laid lime plaster. It was painted sometime between 1509 and 1510, and here we see a variety of important historical figures all together. Among them we see images of Alexander the Great. We see Leonardo da Vinci, Plato, Aristotle, Raphael himself, Pythagoras, among a great many other people as well. Here again we have this illustration. If you look at the black line, we can kind of see this idea of a vanishing point or vanishing line to show depth. The fact that those people that are below that line are closer to us, and they seem closer to us because they're bigger, as compared to those that are further back, closer to the line, are smaller and seem further away. Again, it's this whole idea of perspective that we talked about earlier, and Raphael liked to use some of that in his art. This painting is known as The Marriage of the Virgin, depicting the Virgin Mary and Joseph getting married. Painted in 1504, it was paid for by Filippo degli Albizini to hand in a church that was dedicated to St. Francis. It is one of Raphael's more known pieces of art. It is also believed to have been inspired by another painter, his mentor actually, Pietro Perugino, which looks very similar to this one. Similar backgrounds, the foreground's a little differently, but very similar as far as the comparison between the two works. And there we have it. We have our 4 artists, and where we get the idea of the Ninja Turtles and their namesake, sort of. So now you can kind of see that these guys actually had existed in some way in the past, and that of course the cartoon industry has put a little history with a little bit of fun. So there you have it. Besides the 4 artists we just spoke of, there were a great number of other artists. Botticelli, Titan, Bordone, D'Antonio, just to name a few. It was these artists and those who commissioned their work that help us to better understand the time period from where they lived and did their art. And although it can be said that the Renaissance only affected a small portion of the population, namely the rich and the church, there leaves little doubt that without these master craftsmen and master artisans, we would not have an understanding of the values and of the humanity that existed during the time period that we call the Renaissance. That does it for our lecture 2 today on the sculptors and artists of the Renaissance. As usual, if you have any questions or would like to comment, please let me know or leave a little discussion piece in the comment area on our website or on the YouTube page. And with that, I'm done, and have a great day. Be awesome.